Good morning, third year, and well done to all of those of you who've managed to gather data on your muscular endurance and also who've started on your circuit training fitness program in order to start developing your muscular endurance and improving it. So in today's lesson, we're going to be looking back at how we gather data, and we're going to be looking at how to describe the methods of gathering data that we used. We're also going to be working on our understanding of why we gather data, what's the point in doing it, how we analyse the data, so what do we do with that number and that score once we've got it. We're going to be setting goals based on our data, and we're also going to be looking at how we explain why we use the data gathering methods we did, what is important when you choose a data gathering methods, and how do you answer that question in an exam situation. So how did we gather data on muscular endurance? So we did 3 tests. We did the 2-minute press up test for the upper body. We did a plank test that measured the muscular endurance in our core muscles. And thirdly, we did a wall sit, which gathered data on the muscular endurance of our lower body muscles. So one of the tasks you've been set today is that you have to describe one of the methods of gathering data that you've used. So either the 2-minute press up test, the plank test, or the wall sit test. If a question in PE asks you to describe something you've done, what it's really looking for is for you to provide a set of instructions that would allow the person that's reading it to recreate exactly what you did. Now, a template or a structure that you can use to make sure you write a really good answer for a described question is 4 bums and a bench. So here we've got 4 bums and they're sitting on a big bench. So it's 4 W's and a big H, and obviously each of those letters stands for a word. So if you're thinking about describing something, you want to be thinking, what did I do? Where did I do it? When did I do it? Who did I do it with? And how did I do it? So what is the method called? Where did I do it? When did you do it? Who did you do it with? And how did you do it? So what equipment did you need? How was it set out? And what were the steps you did in order to complete the test? And when you've written this out, the person reading it should be able to exactly recreate the test, even if they didn't have a clue about physical education or about the test itself. So I'll now give you an example of how I would describe the 2-minute press up test. So I'm thinking about my 4 bums on the bench. So the first W is what? So to measure my muscular endurance, I performed a 2-minute press up test. And when did I perform it? I performed this test at 12 PM. Where did I do it? I performed the test in a clear area in my front room. Who did I do it with? I performed the test by myself. Finally, how? To perform the test, I needed a stopwatch and a phone to record my score. I started the stopwatch and did as many press-ups as I could in 2 minutes. When the 2 minutes was up, I recorded the number of press-ups I had managed to complete on my phone. So as you can see, when I read this back, I feel I've given enough information that someone reading it through could perform the test exactly as I did. So when you've finished your question, read it back over and see if you've included all the information someone reading it needs to perform the test exactly as you did. You can now pause the presentation and attempt task 1 in your task sheet. So we've all gathered data on muscular endurance, and we've been looking at how to describe how we gather data, but why do we bother? What is the point in gathering data? Well, there's 3 main reasons to gather data, and it's all to do with developing performance and developing performance in the most effective and efficient way possibly. The first thing the data gathering allows us to do is to identify our strengths and areas for development. If we only stick to our strengths and only work on our strengths, we can only make very small improvements in our performance. If, however, we identify weaknesses and work on them, we can see huge gains in our performance. So it's really important, if we want to make big gains in our performance, that we identify what are our strengths and what are our areas for development, and we do that by gathering data on the different factors. Gathering data also allows us to establish a baseline, so a level that you're at just now. This is important because it means you can retest yourself later and see if your training is being effective. If you're not seeing any improvements, then you get instant feedback that you need to change something in your training, because you're wasting your time if you aren't seeing the improvements that you hope to be seeing. Finally, gathering data allows you to set goals that are measurable. Because if you've got a score for muscular endurance, say in your press-up test, you know you can do 20 press-ups in 2 minutes, then you can set a goal based on it for the end of your training period. Perhaps you want to be up to 30 press-ups by the end of your training period. Setting a goal keeps you motivated, and it also allows you to see whether your training has been as effective as you want it to be, or whether you need to make changes. So now that you've all gathered data on your muscular endurance for your upper body, your core and your lower body, what do we actually do with that information? You'll have either got a time or a number of repetitions that you managed, but how do you tell whether it's a strength or an area for development? Well, the way that we analyse our scores in fitness tests is that we compare our scores to what's called normative data. Essentially, what is the normal score for people of your age and your sex in your location. So I've uploaded a set of normative data for the 3 tests we did, so that you can look at your own score and compare it to the average and to the different bandings for people in the UK of roughly your age. So for the 2-minute press-up test, for example, males 15 to 19, if you got less than 17, it says you're in the needs improvement band. If you got between 18 and 22, it's fair. 23 to 28 is good. 29 to 38, very good. 39 or above is excellent. So very quickly you can see whether your muscular endurance for your upper body is a strength or an area for development. Now, just because you got an excellent score doesn't necessarily mean it's a strength. If you are an Olympic rower, for example, you probably want to be getting a higher score than 39, because excellent is for the national average. That includes people who are not physically active, and therefore you may still consider that as an area that you can develop. And muscular endurance is one of those areas where you can always make gains and improve on, and that's why we've chosen it as one of the main focuses for you in lockdown. Another task that I'd like you to do today is to set yourself goals for your muscular endurance. What do you want to achieve by the end of the 4-week block when we retest your muscular endurance using the same test that we used at the start? So you're going to set yourself 3 SMART goals. So what do I mean by SMART? Well, first they have to be specific. What factor is the goal for? If you set a goal that says, I want to be better at football, that's very vague. What do you mean, and how are you going to know if you've achieved that? But if you're specific, and if you say, I want to improve my muscular endurance and I want to be able to do 30 press-ups in the 2-minute press-up test, that's a very specific goal, and you're going to really know whether you achieved that or not. Your goal has to be measurable, so you must be able to tell when you've achieved it. Fortunately, we've got a score that we can set, so what score would you like to achieve by the end of the 4-week block? It's got to be appropriate, so your goal must be about what you want to achieve. If you want to become a better footballer, there's no point setting a goal that's to do with learning the violin, for example. So in this case, is your goal to do with muscular endurance? It must be realistic. You can't set a goal that says, I want to be in 4 weeks' time doing 30 more press-ups than I was at the start. You might be able to improve by 1 band against the normative data, so have a think about how realistic your goal is. Finally, and a really important one, it's really important that any goals you set in life or in fitness, that they're time-based and you put a date by which you want to achieve your goal. This helps motivate you and keep you on track, because you know exactly when it wants to be by. If you don't put a time on it, then it's easy to say, I'll start next week, I'll do it later. As soon as you put that time on it, it gets you started and gets you working towards your goal. So at the end of this slide, if you pause the slideshow and complete tasks 2 to 6, in your task sheet. So these tasks will ask you to follow them in order to fill out the data gathering table that's in your task sheet. So you'll need to identify the methods you use to gather data, identify the muscle groups each method used, record your scores, compare them to the normative data which I've provided in a sheet that's attached to your Show My Homework assignment, and to set target scores for the end of the 4-week block. So based on the scores you've recorded, what score would you like to achieve by the end of your 4-week block? That's tasks 2 to 6. If you pause the slideshow now and try filling that in. So why did I choose the 3 tests that I did to measure our muscular endurance? There's a lot of different ways you can measure your muscular endurance, but I chose the 3 tests because they met all or most of the following 5 criteria. And these are the criteria that you should look for when deciding on an appropriate method of gathering data. Is the method practical, accurate, relevant, valid, and measurable? And the acronym is PARVM. And you're going to use this a lot if you go into National 5 or higher PE. For methods of gathering data and approaches to developing performance, we must always think, are they PARVM? Okay, practical, accurate, relevant, valid, or measurable. Practical. Practical means that your test is easy to set up and perform, and it shouldn't require too much equipment. So obviously all the tests that we did required very little equipment and were very quick and easy to do, taking about 1 or 2 minutes only. So if your test is practical, it's quick to perform, which means you can quickly identify strengths and weaknesses and begin your development program straight away, so you can get right to the improvement part. If your test is practical as well, it's easy to retest and see if you have made progress. Accurate. So it's important that your test is accurate, because if it's not accurate, you'll not get a true representation of whether a factor is a strength or a weakness, and this could lead you to working on something that you shouldn't be working on and wasting time and effort. So why might your test not be accurate? Well, it might not be accurate if the information it gives you is hard to make sense of, because then you may interpret incorrectly. If it gives you clear, simple information, then it's more likely that you'll have accurate data. So again, the 3 tests we did gave you a very simple either time or number to count, so it's easy to be accurate. Reliable. Your test must be able to provide consistent results. So if you did the test one day and then did it the next day, you should get very similar results. Why is that important? Well, if your test is reliable, then you can trust it as a baseline and you can measure progress accurately because you know it's going to give you reliable results as you go along, so you can really measure improvement. Valid. Valid basically means that a test is scientifically recognised or is widely used by industry professionals such as personal trainers or sports coaches to test the factor you're measuring. Why is this important? Well, if a test is widely used and recognised, then it's going to have normative data, which means you can assess your performance against national averages and find out whether something's a strength or a weakness. It also allows you to have confidence in its findings, and they'll accurately tell you whether a factor is a strength or area for development, as if it's based in science, then you can trust its findings. Finally, measurable. So does the test give you a score or a number at the end? Why is this important? Well, if you're given a number as a score, then it allows you to easily compare it against other scores, and it allows you to set measurable goals. It also allows you to clearly see progress in a retest, as you can see the difference in your numerical score. So as you can see, all 3 tests we did gave you a number, either a time or a number of repetitions, which means it's easy to set goals and it's easy to see the difference when we retest. So your final test today is you have to explain why you used a method of gathering data. Whenever you explain something in PE, you use the PO chain to structure your answer. And if you're explaining why you used a method of gathering data, you're going to use the PO chain to explain why the method of gathering data you used was PARVM, so practical, accurate, reliable, valid, or measurable. So the point you make is the method I used the method I used because it is practical, accurate, reliable, valid, or measurable. You then explain what that means. So what does practical mean? It means that it's easy to set up and do. You then give an example of why your method is practical, accurate, reliable. So if you're saying practical, my method is practical because it requires very little equipment and only takes 2 minutes to perform. You then give the outcome, so why is it important that it is practical or accurate or reliable? And you refer back to the reasons that we gather data. So it's because it's practical and easy to set up, it means I can easily retest, which means I can see whether I'm progressing properly and make any adjustments to my development program to make sure it's effective. So you can see point, explain, example and outcome using Parvum as your structure. So here's a quick example of me explaining why I chose a certain test. I'm using the Planck test as my test, and I'm saying I used it because it's a valid method of gathering data. So the point is, I used the Planck test because it is a valid method of gathering data on muscular endurance. I then explain a valid test is one that is widely recognised by experts and is used widely by professionals. An example, the Planck test is used widely to measure muscular endurance by PTs and coaches around the world. And then the outcome, why is that important? As a result, I can trust the accuracy and relevance of the results and get a true picture of whether muscular endurance is a strength or a weakness. So at the end of this lesson, you should have filled out the task sheet. On that, you should have recorded your score from the tests you've undertaken, identified which muscle group each test analyses, analysed your scores using the normative data sheet provided to see whether muscular endurance is a strength or a weakness for you. You then should have set a goal for your muscular endurance after 4 weeks of training, because for the next 4 weeks you're going to be completing your circuit and your practical lessons, and hopefully that should see real gains in your muscular endurance if you continue to reflect on your timings and adjust them. You should also have described one method of gathering data and also explained one reason why you used a method of gathering data. And hopefully through this, you've really deepened your understanding of the methods of gathering data on muscular endurance, why we gather data, why is it important, and also what are the 5 criteria that allow us to choose appropriate methods of gathering data. Thanks for all your attention and hard work. If you've made it this far, I'm really impressed, so thank you very much and well done. If you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to email me. Cheers.